Welcome, viewers. It is our pleasure and privilege once again to welcome you in our weekly discussion. This time, the subject of discussion is something which is very close to all Hindus, the temples. We live in temples virtually in our conscious life, and temples are so important that without their existence, we feel as if we are not living, as if we are not in existence. So it is our symbolic connect with the God. Temples of Kashmir, which are under our discussion, today tell us very sad story. They have lost their glory and they need immediate attention. Temples of Kashmir have lost their glory and restoration of their majesty is call of the day. Outstanding grandeur and architecture of Kashmir temples is matchless. The Kashmiri architecture is different from the rest of India as most temples are square or oblong in design. Kashmiri temples are typically Suddha edifices constructed with one kind of material from base to summit. Thousands of temples in Kashmir face untold desecration, damage, and destruction. How their lost majesty can be regained? That is burning question. What efforts are needed to restore their diminished glory? To discuss these matters, we have with us Mr. Sunil Rajanaka, who has extensively traveled all over Kashmir and have visited hundreds of temples. He is recording the history of Hindu temples, which can be viewed on his YouTube channel. The link is given in the description box. He is also in editorial board of NAD, a monthly magazine of All India Kashmiri Samaj. Mr. Sunil Raina, you are most welcome. And the subject is close to your heart, as it must be to all Hindus. When we talk about Kashmiri temples, especially, of course, as Hindu, all temples are close to our heart. But when we talk about Kashmiri temples, what comes to your mind as no distinct feature of Kashmiri temples?
Namaskar, Captain Sir. I would like to thank you for inviting me for today's important discussion. I would also like to thank all the viewers who will be joining us in subsequently. I would like to start this session with the invocation of the mantra of Goddess Sharda. Namaste Sharda Devi Kashmir Puravarsini Tam Tam Prarthe Nityam Vidyam Jnanam Dehime. With the invocation of the Goddess Sharda, you know that Kashmir Mandala, as defined in the Sanskrit literature, history, and of course in the subsequent Sanskrit works, is referred as the abode of Goddess Sharda. So when you refer something which is beyond description or which is very elegant, so naturally the things which come to our mind or which come to that place is that there should be something unique to that place. So whether it comes to the snow-capped mountains, the meandering rivers, the beautiful gardens, the fruit-laden trees, the rivers of its great importance, or even the area which is full of flowers. So these all are the beautiful aspects of Kashmir. And in this beautiful valley, uh, the Sanskrit civilization was not only nurtured, but it came to its greatest pinnacle. It reached to its zenith, or it reached to one of the greatest civilizations in the Hindu India. So Kashmir, as of now, or in the earlier times, the Buddhist historians referred Kashmir Gandhar Janapad. They refer that Kashmir and Gandhar have a unity, or they called it a cultural connectivity, and this whole area was full of uh, great innovations, the great scriptural value, and of course, the Kashmir had given the three important contributions to the Indian civilization, or which I call personally Sanskrit Hindu civilization. The first being the aesthetics. So the Kashmir aesthetics, whether it was dance, drama, music, performing arts, vocal music, so that was one of the its greatest contribution. Many few people may not be knowing that the Carnatic music founder, the father, which we call him Sharang Dev, was basically a Kashmiri Pandit who traveled from his father traveled from Kashmir to Karnataka, and then he subsequently the great aesthetician Abhinav Gupta, who gave the different karnas of the performing dance, is considered one of the greatest human being who has ever walked on the earth. So therefore, when you have a setting, when you have a culture so diverse, rich, there is no true opinion that why that cannot be reflected into the architecture or in the building structure. So the Kashmir got influenced by its rich cultural, philosophical, intellectual scholars, and they developed the Kashmirian architectural kind of a thing, which was very predominant from the 5th century to, I must say, up to 11th or later part of the 12th century. Because after the Islamic conquest of Kashmir, this architecture totally vanished from Kashmir. So, as per the historical records, we can say that the earliest grand temple architecture in Kashmir started from the times of Meruvardhan, which was around 5th century of the Common Era, and the zenith of this temple making was around 8th century when the great king of Kashmir, Lalitaditya Mukta Pida, ruled Kashmir, and later subsequently his rulers of the Kashmir, especially Avanti Varman, Shankar Varman, and few more, continued this beautiful architectural construction of the temples. So this period of almost 700 years was one of the greatest periods in Kashmir where this kind of architecture flourished, which was rich in its aesthetics. You can see the murals on the temples, motifs, the cellars on the temples, the rocks or the kind of stones used in it, the cutting of the stones, the building blocks of these temples, and of course that kind of a technology they would be having on moving these big block of boulders from one place to another and then creating a superstructure, foundational stones, then the structure, then the superstructure is completely marvelous. And the one can visit the temples, especially of Marthand. The more temples are especially in central Kashmir, especially if one goes to Naranag near Kangan. It was a huge temple complex of hundreds of shivlings there, and now, of course, only two of them are remaining. And the water tank there is made of a single stone. It's such a huge water tank, one cannot imagine that a single stone was cut and made into a water tank. Similarly, the building blocks of the stones, which are very heavy and made probably of greater weightage, are being placed one over the another, and one wonders that today we have a great technology in terms of cranes and in terms of lot of many other things. How these people some 1400 or 1500 years would have put these building blocks or rocks one over the other, they have chiseled it and made it in such a perfect design that one gets completely amazed by the architectural grandeur. And I must say that Indians, especially, have missed this part of Kashmir. They have not understood the importance of this architectural heritage, which are forefathers. Because when I say forefathers, the kings of Kashmir, the rulers of Kashmir, are the has a civilizational continuity with each and every Indian, irrespective of its region and location.
Renaji, when we talk about Kashmiri temples, of course, one temple which you have mentioned, Marthan Temple, but then Kashmir is proud to have one of the oldest temple. Can we discuss something about that so-called oldest temple in India?
See, as I said that it's very difficult to, because not much work has been done in terms of identifying the historical dates of these temples. I could only say that the temples which have been known to us, starting from the Uri, which is the Data temple, which is probably said has been built by Lalita Ditya. Then, if you come to in between from Uri to Srinagar, there is a Patan, which was basically known as Shankar Varman, was the ruler there. He made a Sugandeshwar temple, Sugandeshwar Mahadev temple there. Subsequently, if you come to Srinagar, near the Srinagar, there is a Pandaretan, so 5 kilometers from the Srinagar city. That is one of the architectural designs because it is said that during the Pravarsin's time, this temple was made, which is around 4th century of the Common Era, or we must say around 1600 years from now. That temple has a great shivling in between the temple, and as per the historical accounts, this temple had the 8 matrikas around the means 8 goddesses around this temple, out of which now 4 or 5 have been traced out. Rest we don't know. So these temples, which are some 1600 years old, give us an idea of the advanced civilization and the kind of a thinking of the rulers that they wanted to create these kind of a monumental heritage, not only for their name but for the sake of the civilization. And these ruins make us feel pride that such a great human beings who have been there, or architects had been there, who created such a beautiful architecture. As I said, that Kashmir had a great fund of knowledge in terms of aesthetics. So most of these temples are full of aesthetics value. Like if you go to these temples, the leaf motifs, the flowers, the design of the flowers on the cellars or on the pillars or even on the foundations, they tell us that how it was conceived, that such architecture design was created on these stones, which even now make the great archaeologists or historians feel one full of wonder that such kind of architecture ever lived in Kashmir. Subsequently, as I said, there is a place called Naranag, which has a huge temple complex, has a lot of architectural value. Uh, there are many hidden places. Recently, during my visit, there is a place called Anantnag, you may all may be knowing. And from Anantnag, some 20 kilometers away, there is a spring called Kuthar Spring. So Kuthar Spring is the spring of Lord Shiva, and in that spring, around that spring, there is a huge temple complex and nobody knows about it. When I say a huge temple complex, it had a to my understanding, it had at least one, two, four, five temples of a big structural value. Around that, there were temple means residential complexes for the people. So this temple's structure is also around 4th or 3rd century era. So one can see that if such a great architecture was there and which is hidden from the eyes of the people, and the spring has a important the spring in between those temple complex known as Kothar. Kothar is also the name of Shiva, Lord Shiva there. It is said that whosoever has some ailments take a dip in that spring and is cured by diseases. So the area around this had a large temple complex, and this temple complex is completely hidden from the even from the people of Kashmir, not to speak about the rest of the India. And the unfortunate part of all this is that very few people in the archaeological department of India take responsibility in identifying these temples or even telling the nation that these such historical monuments are in Kashmir. Similarly, there is a huge temple complex from if you come from Srinagar to Anantnag, there is a place called Avantipur. The temple there is known as Avanti Swamin, and the Avanti Swamin temple is dedicated to the Lord Vishnu. And on the walls of these temples, on the entrance wall, there is a Lord Vishnu reclining on the Sheshnaga along with goddess Lakshmi. And also on the walls of the temple, one can see beautiful carvings of Ganga and Yamuna, which shows that how the kings in Kashmir had a great regard for the civilizational Hindu culture of rest of India. And this temple is formed on the basis of a of a design which is known as Panchayatan temple. Panchayatan means Panch means five. Under the design is that there would be the five temples, subsidiary temples, with the central temple in the center. The five temples of Lord Vishnu are four temples are around the complex on the four corners, and in the center is the Chaturmukhi Vishnu. The other forms of the Vishnu are Pradhaman, Anirudh, and Shankarshan and Vishnu. And the center one is the Lord Vishnu with Chatur form. So this architecture is something unique because many reasons being that since the Sanskrit civilization, the scriptures in Kashmir were so developed that they got imported from Kashmir to the rest of India, and therefore it was important that these get reflected in their temple building, their architecture, and in their day-to-day lives. Many few people would be not knowing that the people in the rest of India who worship Lord Vishnu, they follow tantras, and that tantra is known as Pancharatra Agam. So these Pancharatra Agam, according to which the worship of Lord Vishnu is done, were written in Kashmir. So very few people know about it. That these Pancharatra Agam, which form the foundational text of the Vaishnav ritualistic system, were written in Kashmir, and because of that, it can be seen that there were a lot of Vaishnav temples in Kashmir. Now there are very few because these temples were very grand. They had a very beautiful design, and the rulers and the invaders, and subsequently the outside religionists came and destroyed these great monumental heritage of the mankind. Similarly, if you go to Martan, which I said, the Martan temple is dedicated to the sun god. The sun worship in Kashmir was very important.
Marthan temple is one temple I would like to discuss at the end of our discussion, because it holds so much of importance, and also it is for different reasons under discussion. Uh, Probably that will showcase what we have faced so far and how to avoid it in future. But when I was doing a little bit of reading on temples of Kashmir, Avanti Swami temple you have already mentioned, Shankara Gauri Shiva temple you have mentioned. One temple's name sounded a little peculiar, and for different reason, I thought it very strange. Kheer Bhavani temple. Kheer Bhavani temple name itself is suggesting something which is probably we are not able to connect. How do you explain the name and origin of this name?
See, as I said, that the Kashmir had a great understanding in philosophy also. The other contribution, when I started, I said that Kashmir had given three contributions to the Indian civilizational ethos. The first was, of course, aesthetics. Second was Kashmiri Shaivism. So Kashmiri Shaivism and the worship of the mother goddess are integral. So when you worship Shiva, you have to worship Shakti, and both of them are integral to each other. And third, of course, was the Sanskrit literature, which came in subsequently into various forms. We can develop it, discuss that sometime later. But when I come to Kashmiri Shaivism, so Kashmir had a great temples dedicated to both to Shakti and to Shiva. And in the Shakti worship, there were many temples dedicated to the mother goddess. The temple of Kheer Bhavani comes under one of the temples which is dedicated to the goddess worship. Subsequently, Sharda is the presiding goddess of whole of Kashmir, which is the temple which is now in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. The presiding deity of whole Kashmir Mandal, the Ishta Devi of Kashmir Mandala is goddess Sharika. She is represented with 18 arms and is one of the forms of Devi Durga. And the Kheer Bhavani temple, which came up very subsequently, the worship of the Kheer Bhavani goddess is across the regions of Kashmir, and the name of the goddess is basically Maharaganya. It is not Kheer Bhavani. The Kheer is being offered to the goddess. It is not the name of the goddess. The name of the deity, the name of the Bhagavati there is Maharaganya, and her husband or the consort with the goddess there is known as Bhuteshwara. So the worship of this Devi is predates Ramayana period. The goddess was in the name was living at Lanka and was worshipped by Ravana. So Ravana, when asked the boon from the goddess that he give me the energy Shakti so that I can go and be victorious over Lord Sri Ram. the Devi got annoyed with Ravana and she requested Hanumanji that she should be taken away from Lanka and be taken to the Sati Desha. So Kashmir was earlier referred as Sati Desha. So she requested Hanumanji she should be taken from Lanka and be placed at Sati Desha. And while coming from Lanka, she had a different stopovers in the Srinagar in around Kashmir Valley, and the final abode which she selected is in Tulmula, which is known as the Sthan of Maharaganya. And now people later subsequently offered kheer to the goddess because every deity has their favorite dish or a flower or a fruit, and subsequently their favorite vahana. So the goddess there had a favorite dish as a kheer, and mistakenly the people call that as a kheer bhavani, which is not the name of the goddess, which is the original name is the Maharaganya. And while coming there to at Tulmula, Maharaganya blessed Hanumanji, and Hanumanji said that after this war with the Ravana, he will try to be there every time. In a day, he will visit Maharaganya Sthan at Tulmula. Sri Ram and Mata Sita come there on every Purnima, and Mandodari comes on every Ashtami, Shukla Paksh Ashtami. Mata Mandodari comes and pays obeisance to the goddess, and on Navami, Vibhishanji comes and pays obeisance. So this is as per the Mahatmya. Mahatmya is a historical and a spiritual account of every deity, every goddess, or every shrine. These are recorded since antiquity. So, as per that Mahatmaya, which is known as Maharagnya Pradurbhav, this is the chronology of events, and that is how it was worshipped there in Tulmula. So, as you said, Kheer Bhavani name, yes, you are right. It should not be named as Kheer Bhavani. People should be made aware that the right name is Maharaganya.
Then my attention is drawn to another fact, maybe wrong impression I carried also. But when I discussed with others, they also thought similarly that predominantly Shavites had influence, and majority of temples in Kashmir are dedicated to Lord Shiva. But then another point which came as part of argument from my friend, Raghunath temple, and he said that you can't be very wrong uh, because it is a good combination and balance of population. Part of them followed Shaivites tradition of Hindu Sanatan Dharma worship. Few of them are Vaishnav. But then Raghunath temple is another temple which is a point under discussion, that it has got a unique place in Hindu religious thoughts and beliefs. So how do you see Raghunath temple, which is probably along with Kheer Bhavani temple, where prayers are continuing undisturbed, undisrupted. So Raghunath
See,
temple is also very important temple in Kashmir.
See, there are two Raghunath temples in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. The one is the famous Raghunath temple of Jammu, which is a huge temple complex and which was built during the Dogra rules. So it may not be more than 150 years old temple, which is the Jammu-based Raghunath temple, or maybe less than that. The subsequently another Raghunath temple got built in Kashmir, which is not very big temple complex as that of Jammu, and that was again built during the Dogra rule. But the point which you're saying that the forms of Vaishnavism, yes, the point is that Kashmir did not worship the forms of later forms of Vishnu like Sri Krishna or Sri Ram in the temples, but Kashmiris worshipped the original form of Vishnu, that is in the form of Vishnu itself or in the form of Narayan itself. So that is why there were many places in Kashmir which are dedicated the springs, especially the springs, the yatras in certain mountains, or what we call as certain caves which are dedicated to the Lord Vishnu. One of the famous uh, uh, Tirtha of Lord Vishnu in Kashmir is nowadays known as Kausar Nag. You may be knowing there was a controversy a few years back that the jihadists or the separatists did not allow a yatra to the Kausar Nag. The original name of the Kausar Nag is Kramsar Nag. Nag in Kashmir means spring. So it is the Kramsar Nag which is in the Shopian district is dedicated to the Lord Vishnu. And the history of Kashmir starts from that particular lake where it is said that Lord Vishnu's foot imprints are in the lake. And Hindus year on year used to go to that particular lake in the high altitude lake and worship Lord Vishnu there. So that Nag, in that Nag, when they used to conduct the yatra, a special prayer to their ancestors was then done. Shraddh was performed for their ancestors, and a boon was granted from Lord Vishnu for the well-being of the families. Now, secondly, the whole Karmakant system of Kashmiri Hindus is based on Vaishnavism. So we can't say that Vaishnavism or Vishnu later, as I said, later Vishnu forms were not worshipped as such, but in a day-to-day practice, so Vishnu Vaishnavism was practiced, worshipped like in our Janamdin Puja, our birthday celebration. All the litany of rituals are mostly Vaishnavites. So we can't say that Kashmir was only a Shaivite because in Kashmir, as in other parts of India, the distinction between Shaivite and Vaishnavite was very thin. We may have been worshipping, we may be a great Shaivite bhaktas, but our day-to-day rituals were based on the Vaishnavite parampara. So it was not a distinction as such, which is seen in other parts of India. I had traveled other parts of India. The Vaishnavites will not go to the Shaivite temple, or Shaivite will not go to the Vaishnavite temple because they claim their deity is superior or that deity is superior. But in Kashmir, they were all worshipped together because in Kashmir, the philosophy was that these different forms of the supreme are basically the parts of the same consciousness. They evolve from the same. You may like this form of a supreme, you may like this form of a supreme. Ultimately, they are one, and we should adopt, accept, and live the way which our rishis, munis, and Vedic seers have been living. So, it was in harmony that both these sects. I must not say the word sect because in Kashmir, as I said, there was no distinction between so both of them intermingle. So the worship of Lord Sri Ram came predominantly during the Dogra rule. However, in the poetic lores of Kashmir, in the literature, of course, Lord Rama's literature, his poetry, his work was, of course, celebrated. So was Lord Krishna's birthday, Janmashtami celebrated. You must be unaware that Kashmiri Hindus keep a fast on Janma Ashtami, a day prior to Janmashtami, which we call as Saptami. On Saptami, we all keep a fast at our homes. A special recitation of the Bhagavad Gita is being done, a particular chapters is done on that day, and a cradle of Sri Krishna is placed at our homes and worship. So Sri Krishna's, because Sri Krishna's influence on Kashmiri psyche, on Kashmiri worship is so much that they always consider him as a Purna avatar. So yes, temple construction did not happen in the memorial of these two deities, but they were the part of our psyche, our values, and our day-to-day puja paddhati.
Mr. Rana, I have seen many of your YouTube videos. You travel far and wide. When you have gone to interiors of Kashmir, you visited temples. Most of them are in ruins for different reasons, but it gives indication that how much heritage we are about to lose when we talk about Kashmiri temples. How much history we have already, lost. Would you share some very strange temple you have come across? Strange in the sense that such temples are not seen, not uh, uh, being known by common Hindus. A temple which for you was very unique to visit.
During my recent visit, there are three such cases which I found very unique. One temple is the Shiva temple in Pulwama. It is around built around 12th century. I think the last temple in Kashmir of the great architecture on the great architectural design. It is a Shiva temple, and it is the temple which is still intact and complete because it's in a village. So I think it was not destroyed. It has the opening on the four sides, a shivling in between, and it's that it's based on some Gandharian architectural style. So far, the temples which are prior to 10th or 12th century or in Kashmir, they are either completely destroyed or they are vandalized or are in ruins. So this is the only temple which gives us a complete picture of the Kashmirian architectural design. So it has a sloped roofs because the Kashmir has a slope, a snow, so they have a slope roof of all that of a stone. All the motifs, all the cellar designs, the floral designs, the foundations, they are all intact. So that gave me an immense hope that this is how the other temple would have been. Secondly, there is a temple in Shupian. Shupian was basically, you might have heard Shupian often in the news. So the original name of the Shupian was Shivpuri, so it got deformed to Shupian.
True.
So in the Shupian, there is a spring, and adjacent to the spring there is a shivling, and shivling has a thousand of holes. So it is said that it is a thousand-eyed shivlinga, and locals have many times seen that jyoti emanating out from the shivling. So the roof of that shivling is kept open. And if you know, in the Puranic history, there is said that Lord Shiva severed the fourth head of Lord Brahma. So after severing the head of Brahma, Lord Shiva was feeling guilty of of this act, and therefore, for the redemption of this act, he came to this particular place in Shupian, prayed there for the redemption, and got rid of its sin. So next to this temple, there is a spring, another spring of Saptarishis, and then there is another spring where those who had untimely died, those people who had untimely died, their shards are performed, and as per the Puranic lore and the Mahatmya of this temple, those people who shards are performed there and who have untimely died get rid from the cycle of birth and death. So they get moksha. So this was something unique for me to see. And one more temple, it's not a temple, it's a cave. It's a cave called Harsheshwar Mahadev. So Harsheshwar Mahadev temple is around 7 kilometers from the road. It's up in the mountains, and the temple is this cave is the place as per the Puranic lore. You might have heard that Basmasur came and he tried to put his hand over Lord Shiva, and Lord Shiva was hiding from that Basmasur for quite some time till Mohini came and made certain dance forms and got the Basmasur finally engrossed in that dance. So that cave there is where Lord Shiva hid himself for some time till Bhasmasur got till he got rid of the Bhasmasur. So you can see now when we see go to these places, we can not see how these episodes, which are part of our day-to-day lives, our historical lore or our Puranic lore, and actual events have happened here, and nobody knows about it. So then I come to understand that even in Rajtarangni, this great historian Kalhana says that in Kashmir there is not a space equivalent to a sesame seed, which is not a tirtha, which means that every nook and corner of Kashmir is a tirtha, and these events, these Puranic historical events, give us an idea how the cultural civilizational continuity of Kashmir was with the whole of the Hindu civilization.
How many temples you might have visited so far?
See, in Kashmir, I went to those. My aim was to visit those temples which are hidden from the public. So most of these temples were either in remote villages or they were at such obscure places where even in last 30 years nobody has gone there. So it must be around some 100 temples which I have covered during my visits to these places. So as I said, my focus was not to cover those temples which are known, but those temples which are unknown, which are obscure, and where no takers are there to take care of these grand places. So, as I said, one of the places I went to in Kukwara, that place is known as Trigam. In Trigam, there is a spring, huge spring, and in the huge spring there is a small shivlinga, and from beneath the shivlinga the water comes and then flows to the bigger spring and then flows downwards. And the name of this spring is known Chitragupt spring. Now I was wondering, Chitragupt. So Chitragupt is an accountant of Lord Yamraj,
True.
and Lord Yamraj has been his attendant or his accountant is been named here in this spring. So see, each and every spring in Kashmir is dedicated to some kind of a deity. Similarly, there was one more spring in a place called Pulwama. You might be heard. Pulwama is quite often in the news. So in Pulwama there is a village, and the name of that village. You know what is the name of the village? It is named as Indar. The name of the
Yeah.
village is on the name of Lord Indra, and there is a spring in the middle of that village which is known as Indaraj Spring. So, what I mean to say is that all these places, many of the springs have been now filled up, have been captured, or have been taken over by uh, miscreants or the people around because of their land value, or they wanted to grab it for certain religious reasons, or they wanted to destroy the Hindu civilizational continuity over there. So, that's an unfortunate part. But having one more, yes, one more spring which I visited was, Kashmir, as you said, Marthan Temple. So the founder of the Marthan Temple, Durlabh Vardhana, traces his family origin to a spring called Karkut. So Karkut is one of the nine Nagas on which Lord Vishnu recoils. The nine Nagas on which Lord Vishnu recoils, these are Karkut, Padma, Mahapadma, Shankapal, Anantanag, Sheshnag, and of course Karkut. So these are the nine Nagas, and one of the Nagas which is very powerful among these nine Nagas is Karkut, and that Karkut spring is in Kashmir, in the mountains of a village called Salia, and on that Salia village, this Karkut Nag is there, and many Siddhas, many Rishis, and many Mahatmas have done their sadhana at that particular place. And the Lalita Ditya Mukta Pida is known from the Karkut dynasty. And then that curiosity came in. I said, why this Karkut? What is Karkut? So then I came to know that Karkut is basically the name of a spring, the name of a spring deity. So I went to that
Mhm.
Karkut Nag and visited that place. So that is again a very beautiful place up in the mountains, and see how the spring deity gave the Vardhan to its worshipper Durlabh Vardhana, and Durlabh Vardhana's family continued to rule Kashmir for 300 years. So these were the different accounts which I could imagine. Similarly, if you go to Pahalgam, in the Pahalgam there is a temple, Mamaleshwar temple, Mamaleshwar. So adjacent to the temple there is a river, Lidar. You know, many people whosoever goes to Pahalgam, from Pahalgam to Anantnag, you can see a river meandering its ways, which later joins the river Vitista or the Jhelum somewhere downstream. So this Lidar is basically Lambodri. The name of the Lidar is Lambodari on the name of Lord Ganesha, because Lord Ganesha is referred as Lambodar, and the river is Lambodari because the episode of severing of Lord Ganesha's head happened at Pahalgam, and therefore that river which flowed nearby was named after Lord Ganesha as Lambodari, and then it got converted into a Lidar. So therefore there were many places in Kashmir. Means you go to any place in Kashmir, it has a Sanskrit name. Anantnag, Pahalgam, go to Srinagar. Many people believe because the Srinagar had a original Sri Yantra placed at the Hari Parvat. So that is why, because of Sri Chakra being there and Sri Devi being worshipped there, the place got the name as Srinagar. Similarly, Baramulla, as you said, Vishnu worship, as I said, Vishnu worship was very predominant in Kashmir. The Baramulla's original name is Varahamul. So Vara is one of the avatars of Lord Vishnu, and Baramulla derives its name from Varahamul. Even now in Kashmir also we called Baramulla as Varmul. So Vara worship or the Lord Vishnu's worship was very predominant in that region. So even if you go to Kupwara or beyond Kupwara near the LOC, at the LOC there is a river which divides Kashmir with the Pakistan occupied Kashmir. The river is known as Kishan Ganga. So many people used to go there and perform puja of the river on Janmashtami day. So this is how the Hindus used to worship the natural springs, mountains, rocks, caves, and name them after the deities and worship them on those specific days.
Uh, Now we come to that part which I requested you to discuss at the end of this discussion. The most iconic temple, for good reason and for bad reason, Marthan Temple. When we talk about Marthan Temple, at least I am filled with mixed emotions. The majesty is so overawing, and destruction is so disturbing. Let's discuss something about Marthan Temple.
See, first of all, Marthan temple is dedicated to sun god Surya, and the Marthan derives its name from Sanskrit word Mrit and, dead egg. So Aditi, the mother of the sun god, she had 12 sons, and the 13th son, his beta, was not in the form of a human being. It was in the form of an egg, unfertilized egg, which was laid in the Kashmir, which is known as Satisar. And then Rishi Kashyap prayed to Lord Vishnu that egg was cut into two pieces, and then the sun god was born out of it. The light emerged out of it, and sun god uh, placed into the planet as one of the part of a solar system. So this is the Puranic lore of this, and the Martan is the Mritan. So the Martan temple gives us an idea that Kashmir had a great followers of sun worship. So, as I said, Ganesh worship was there because a lot of Ganesh places in Kashmir are dedicated to Lord Ganesha. As I said, Pahalgam had a Ganesh temple. Then in Srinagar we have a Ganesh temple. Even at near Hari Parvat we have a Ganesh temple dedicated to God. Then in Kangan there is a river. In the river there is a temple, a big stone which is worshipped as a Ganesh. In Sharda Peeth, which is now in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, there is a huge mountain which is known as Ganesh Ghati, and that Ganesh Ghati looks like elephant face, which means Lord Ganesha, and that is known as Ganesh Ghati. So similarly, in this part of Kashmir, in southern Kashmir, the worship of sun was also very predominant, and therefore the Lalita Ditya, who was a great aesthetician, means lover of art and building maker, he a monument maker. He thought of consecrating or constructing a monument in the name for Lord Surya Narayan, and therefore he put up a great architecture plan and got consecrated and this constructed this Surya temple, which is now known as Martin Temple. Around the Martin Temple, there are basically 37 deities in different icons all over it. There is a huge small cellars over there where the pujaris or the sadhaks or the visitors had used to come and stay over there. The important part of that temple is also that the sun is worshipped as Surya Narayan and Surya Rudra. So when you call Surya Narayan, the sun is worshipped as a Vishnu in the form of a light. And when you say Surya Rudra, the sun is worshipped in the form of a Rudra in the form of its heat component. Because when there is a light, there is a heat. So when it is light, he is worshipped as Narayan, and when it is heat, it is worshipped as Rudra. So these two components can be seen on the forms inside the complex. It is said that when the temple arc was complete, the first light of the sun would enter into the Garbhagriha in the sanctum sanctorium and illuminate the deity naturally. So such was the great design of this temple, and this temple is based on a certain height from rest of the regions around the regions, and it gives a beautiful view of the Kashmir Valley from that particular location. So one was because of its location; it was on a height, gave a 360-degree view of the Kashmir Valley. Two, that it was such a place that the design was made in such a way that the first light of the sun would enter the sanctum sanctorum and illuminate the deity. And third, what was important that the region around it had people who were sun worshippers. So at 10 kilometers below that Martin temple, there is still one tirtha which is known as Mutton. You might have visited. It is now the existing place where a lot of purohits sit there. There's a spring there. The shads are performed for those ancestors who have left us, and the people, these purohits, used to preserve the gotras and the family lineages of Hindus, of people coming from different parts of Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, and of course Kashmir. So they used to preserve that bahi, means एक detailed book होती थी जिसपे, for example, you are going, then they will match your signature. Okay, you have come, your gotra is this. Okay, then they used to track when your grandfather or your father or somebody from your family had come. So all that record was maintained over there. And since the sun is the predominant deity of our solar system, so worship of that area was mostly done by the sun worshippers. So therefore, the people in that area had a great faith in the sun worship. However, it was only Sikandar Butshikan. Butshikan is a epitaph which was given to him, name given to him because he destroyed all the beautiful temples in the valley. So around 14th century, Sikandar, which iconoclast, destroyed this Martin temple because he was not able to believe in such a great temple architecture, such a great marvel, which was one of the befitting architectural examples of Kashmirian style. What he did, he tried to use all the available masonry to destroy it. When he failed, then what he did, he cut the trees around the hills, made the bonfire of these woods inside the temple, and slowly and steadily, because of the excessive uh, heat of these burning fire, these stones chipped off, cracked, and got destroyed. And then he subsequently removed those beautiful architectural marvels from that place and destroyed them. So that is one of the greatest pains which has we have seen of the recent history. And Sikandar is his historians have glorified him, that what he did is as per the teachings of his religions, and he has no remorse over it, and he did which every Muslim should have done in his or her lifetime. So that is the great tragedical part. I think not only this happened to Martin. Subsequently, the temples at Avantipur, the Data temple at Udi, the temples at Naranag, the temples at Wangat, the temples at Kothar, all these beautiful temples were slowly and steadily destroyed, and their stones taken away, which are used by these local people of other religions in their houses for different purposes. So this is how the historical temples were destroyed. Even today, I mean, when I'm talking to you, when you are talking about Marthan, and in the Tirtha below the Mutton temple, which is below 10 kilometers below that Marthan Sun temple, there is the goddess. The name of the goddess is Bargashaka. So Bargashaka goddess is also at a height, and from the Bargashaka goddess, you can see the Marthan Tirtha also, this temple also. So the Bargashaka goddess is the light which emerged when the sun god was born. So the temple was there, and the goddess is worshipped in the form of a rock. And today we came to know that the temple has been desecrated. It has the periphery of the temple has been destroyed. So this is an ongoing process. And the modus operandi is same. They have put wooden logs over the rock and burnt it. And the same thing is what 700 years back Sikandar Butshikan did with the great Martin temple. So the methodology is same. So we can see the continuity which is witnessing, which we 700 years and even now. So that thing is still happening, and which is a very sad part of it.
This is very, very disturbing development you mentioned. And another disturbing development is regarding Shankaracharya temple. It has been under a lot of controversy and about naming and claiming uh, for very, very stupid, totally unhistorical reason. Shankaracharya temple has not been discussed by us so far. It is believed that it was established by Shankaracharya, Adi
Uh,
Shankaracharya.
See, the temple there is predates the arrival of Adi Shankara. It was known as Gopadari Parvat. So Gopaditya
Hmm.
was the ruler of Kashmir, and one of the his rulers, one of the ruler of that lineage, Gopaditya, formed that temple over there, dedicated to Lord Shiva, and named as Gopeshwar Mahadev. What happened now, that whole history of Gopaditya is put away from the history of Kashmir. The only thing of resembling Gopaditya dynasty is Gupta Road. So you may be knowing now Gupta Road is famous nowadays because that road is on, left only, that Gupta Road. So if you trace back that Gupta Road, why it is called Gupta Road? Because it is named after that hill Gopadiri, and King Gopaditya lived, had his reign in that region in somewhere around 2000 BC, around 2000 AD. So, no, sorry, around 100 BC, around 100 BC, his rule was there of Gopaditya, and that temple is part of that ruler. His family somewhere in down the line constructed this temple of Shankaracharya, which was known as Gopeshwar Mahadev. But it is believed that in 7th century, when Adi Shankaracharya came to Kashmir, he stayed at this particular place, and subsequently the people, out of veneration and respect, named this temple on Adi Shankaracharya. So that is a later development. But yes, of course, Adi Shankaracharya has come to Kashmir. He has composed Saundari Lahari. It is believed that Saundari Lahari was composed at this particular place at Shankaracharya Hill. And from here, he then went to Sharda Peeth, which is now in Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and had a discussion and debate with the scholars of the time. And then the southern door of the Sharda Peeth was opened for the people coming from the south side, and that is how the Adi Shankaracharya was respected among the Kashmiri Hindus.
Before we close the discussion, through you, I and our viewers would be interested to know that when so much bad has happened to our temples, now with changing scenario, is there any restoration work going on?
See that this is a very difficult question, because this restoration work is a work which has to be taken by the respective Hindu organizations or the temple committees, and also by the government, because the government owns the responsibility, because they were not able to protect the Hindus of the Kashmir when they were requiring it, or they were not able to protect these temples. As I said, that today's case is one of the case of such incident. So yes, some restoration work is happening in few of the temples, not all. The few temples which are on the prominent tourist spots is happening, but not all. But not all. But what is important, that even if the restoration is done today, the desecration or the destruction can happen at any point of time. So what is important, that the government should bring out a legislation to protect these temples. Anybody found destructing or desecrating these temples need to be put behind the bars, and the hate mongering and the communal politics needs to stop, and efforts be made that those people, Hindus who have left the valley, they get a justice and return back to valley. Only then you can see the people going to these temples. Otherwise, you can restore this temple today when there is no visitor, no Hindu going to them. What will happen to them? They will again be like that only. The miscreants will come. They will see the value. They will destroy further. So important is to get the justice and get the legislation done for proper upkeep of these temples.
Thank you, Sunil Rana. It has been wonderful discussing about Kashmiri temples with you. You have visited more than 100, as you mentioned, and your knowledge about Hindu temples shows off. And for our viewers, let me share that Sunil Rana is very active on YouTube. His channel description is given in our description box. Link is provided there. You are requested to see the videos. He makes beautiful videos of Hindu temples. and a true patriotic person, which he remains dedicated to cause of our unique Indic identity. Viewers are requested to subscribe our channel and get the notification in advance for our forthcoming discussion. We, on every weekend, Saturday, Sunday, we try to conduct discussion on very topical subjects. And I request Sunil, whenever there is such opportunity coming again, kindly join us and request you